When I go into my projects, when I first start out writing and coming up with these ideas, I am someone who is very organized. I am not a pantser or a discovery writer or something like that. I more or less go in with a pretty clear idea of how I want my stories to play out. I go in knowing where it's going to begin, where it's going to end, and a lot of the major plot points. However, what I don't do is adhere to generally strict outlines. And I think for those that are pantsers, that maybe discovery write, those that like the kind of organic creativity that comes from just sitting at the computer and writing, this might be, my method might be of some help to you. Because I'm someone who is a bit more drawn towards wanting to keep the organic nature of the story intact. This chapter right here, for example, is not something I initially intended, but it's just kind of come about and it ties in well. And so here it is. My process is I start out my projects by knowing my main character and what they're desiring, both superficially and also on a deeper level, what they want. Good writing comes from knowing your characters well. Good writing comes from being able to basically psychoanalyze them. If I asked you real quickly, the character of, say, Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, in the very first one, if I asked you what he wanted, on the superficial level, he wants to basically rescue Princess Leia, and then basically defeat the Empire as the story goes on, right? He wants to stop the Death Star as the story progresses. But if I asked you on a deeper level, what does Luke Skywalker really want? Well, he wants adventure. On a deeper level, what he's desiring is adventure. The entire thing in the beginning of the story is him desiring to actually join the Empire and become a pilot for them. Right, that's sort of hinted at the beginning there. He wants to just get away from the farm life. He's seeking that adventure. And so when I begin my stories, that's where I always start. I need to know what my character wants superficially, and then what they deep down desire. And then often I will come up with some sort of misplaced belief around that. So if my character deeply desires this thing, well, what misplaced belief do they hold that prevents them from just directly getting this thing? That's a bit more complicated to find out, but if you can find that, you have a deeper story. And from there, I have a general idea of where the story will begin, what's going to happen in a general sense, and where it's going to end. But it leaves a lot of room in between to get creative, to get dreamy, as David Lynch would say. You always want to leave room for spontaneity, for these sort of organic things that just come up in the process to play out. And so I think if you can think in that context, if you can know your main character and their desire, their deep desire, and maybe some additional things, like I said, a misplaced belief, or something like that, you can sort of pants your way through a lot of the story. It's not going to become perfect. You're still going to have a lot of issues, potentially maybe with an ending, but you should at least have an idea where your story is going to begin and where it's going to end. If you've got a character, again, the case of like the Luke Skywalker situation, right? If I was to pants that, well, I know that, okay, this person's going to go in search of finding Princess Leia, and they're going to go on adventures because that matches both their superficial desire and their deep desire. That is what we're looking for here. I've used the example of Harry Potter as well, right? In the first Harry Potter book, what happens? Well, Harry wants, superficially, he basically wants to go to school and he wants to find the Philosopher's Stone for some reason. And then on a deep level, what does Harry Potter desire? Well, he desires family. And so with it, I can already see how, if I was going to write that book, how I would start the story by saying, okay, we're going to have some sort of superficial plot surrounding this Philosopher's Stone, and we're going to have to really show these secondary characters, these friends and teachers and people he meets along the way, we got to show them taking on more of a family role. We got to show them becoming basically his new family, in a sense. He's going to replace the parents that he lost. That allows you tons and tons of room to start playing around with the story, to start coming up with different ideas for how you can achieve that. And so if you're someone who is a pantser, who does tend to just discovery write, who goes in without outlines and without being strict, and you want to keep an organic sort of spontaneity about your work, try that. Try starting your projects with just a general concept of what your character wants, what they deep down desire, and then go in and start writing and use that as kind of a navigation. If you ever get lost, always revert back to that. Well, we got to show these elements. It's probably not going to be for everybody. You do still have to obviously have a general understanding of how stories are told, how act structures work, and certain things like that. But for me, that tends to help. For me, this sort of like hybrid of like being well organized and well plotted versus keeping that organic spontaneity in it of a pantser, that kind of in between thing that I do, that tends to work for me. It allows kind of the best of both worlds. And so if you're someone who does like to be organic, who likes to try that, give it a try and see what happens. I think you may find that it may be helpful, especially if you get lost.